Pregame.com.
College basketball Thursday action, ACC. We're going to take a look. Duke travels to Virginia Tech. I'm Marco D'Angelo. I'm joined by Scott Spreitzer. Scott, big ACC game. We got Duke on the road. Line, we saw the early number on this one, and normally, obviously, Duke's one of those marquee teams, but they're laying 3 on the road here. What do you think?
I tell people all the time, and in fact, in a recent article that I posted here on the forum on Monday night, breaking down the top 25, and I broke down 3 teams, one of those being Duke, and I just said, just be careful, because when they're favored, you're usually going to lay a little bit extra. That's that Duke and Coach K mystique. But when I saw this early number, I had to double check for an injury, because I'm never off the 3.5. My power ratings shows a 5 or a 6 here in favor of Duke. Now, power ratings aren't lines, because lines, those guys are trying to equal out the betting. And of course, I'm looking at games from strictly a power perspective. But I don't think you're laying extra here. Just my own personal opinion. Yeah, I know they're 8-13 against the spread in their 21 games this season, but I don't see this being a point where you're laying extra with Duke in this game.
Well, if I remember correctly, you said Duke was overrated in your write-up, and I guess they took your word on that.
I didn't know I had that much power. I guess that's the power of the pregame forum. But
there you go. Well, Duke, to set this up, Duke's 18-3 on the year. They're only 3-2 in true road games. 2-3 against the spread. They're 10-1 at home, 5-0 on neutral sites. They're going into a Virginia Tech team that, here's a team that's not your upper echelon of the ACC for sure. In fact, they've lost 6 of their last 7 games. Their only win came against their arch rival, Virginia, in the rivalry game. So, do they have a shot in this game?
Well, they have a shot, obviously. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if it's less than a 10-point spread, then the underdog has a shot to win the game outright, and they may very well do so playing at home. But they miss Malcolm Delaney, and they miss Jeff Allen, 2 guys who moved on after last year's season. And you're seeing it with the way they play. I mean, I don't get involved with a lot of big marquee matchups, the marquee teams in college basketball, and people have seen me on these videos talking about Missouri Valley games and things of that nature. I tend to try to look at those mid-level conferences before I really jump into the big teams. But the bottom line is that when I look at what this team has done so far, and I went against them when they hosted North Carolina, and it was a real close first half, and then Carolina's talent difference and level of athleticism just blew away Virginia Tech in the second half. And I think that's what you're probably going to see out of the Duke Blue Devils in this one. Yeah, they're not the athletic teams that you would hope out of a team like the Duke Blue Devils. I'm not crazy about the Plumlee brothers. They get out quicked a lot in ACC games and against teams from the Big East and things like that. And we've seen them have problems with some of those athletic teams. And that's what I wrote about in that article also was, give them credit. They did beat, Kansas, Michigan, and Michigan State early this year. So when I say Duke's overrated, there's a lot of relativity measured into that, and a lot of it has to do with lines when I talk about overrated with this team. But they've also lost to Temple and Florida State, and they were completely out of the picture when they were on the floor against Ohio State. The athleticism and talent when healthy for Ohio State was night and day, head and shoulders better than the Duke Blue Devils. And I jotted down a couple of notes from those games. Temple, Florida State, and Ohio State combined to hit 57% of their shots against Duke. They combined to hit almost 53% from area code 3. Now, I don't care if Duke's a little bit down from where they've been. You never hear of the Duke Blue Devils, maybe once in a great while, but against 3 of their step-up teams. The problem is with Virginia Tech, without Delaney, without Allen, they're not a step-up team. And I'm not a big Seth Greenberg fan. I have a lot of respect for the way this guy coached when he was at Long Beach State, some of the lesser teams in South Florida. But he's never gotten this team over the top. He's never been able to recruit the great athletes to come and play for the Hokies.
Well, you're the little brother in this conference. You're going up against the heavyweights in the recruiting wars. One thing I will say about Virginia Tech, as I said, they've lost 6 of the last 7 games.
Right.
They've been competitive, though, in all of the games. 5 of the 6 losses, Scott, were by 4 points or less. Right. So, I mean, this is a team that, because they lost a couple of those starters, do you see that as the season progresses, they're a young ball club, still trying to learn how to win, that maybe when we get done with February and you get into the conference tournaments, that this team might start to blossom and mature because, that's the one thing about college basketball more so than any other sport. You play so many games that you can start the year out with freshmen, and by the time you get to that 30th game at the end of the season, these guys, they've got experience, and, the team, you can see it grow. Yeah. We saw it a few years ago with Memphis when they ran it all the way to the Final Four.
Sure. So I agree. I mean, one of the things I do before the season begins, it's usually about 2 weeks before the season gets going, I'll grab a couple of trustworthy periodicals, and I'll also have my online favorite places to go and get information. And I'll sit down there, and I have a notebook where I do it the old-fashioned way. I'll write out teams that I think are going to be better in February and March, much better, and also getting value at that point because they lost early on, because they have young players. One of the things I like to do early on is to go on teams, or look, not on all of them, but to look to play on teams who return at least 4 out of their 5 starters, as long as they're returning their point guard as one of those 4.
Right.
And the other team has 1 or no starters coming back, and they lost their point guard. And I got those matched up basically a week or 2 before the season begins, and that usually works until about mid-December. But yeah, Virginia Tech's one of those teams. We've talked about that. Brian and I do it a couple of videos. There are certain teams that are really young that might make some noise in March, and they're so battle-tested by going up against the ACC. And as you just mentioned, there are a couple of plays here and there from winning about half of those games that they've lost on this current slide. But the thing is, the great equalizer when it comes to all that is the line. And, all I can say is I'm shocked. I'm a little bit shocked, and I'm never shocked hardly at all, maybe once or twice a year, that the line, as we speak, has Duke favored by less than 2 full baskets. Yeah. That surprises me a little bit, and I lean towards Duke because of that.
Well, I'm on the fence with this one. We're going to go ahead. You're going to make the projection. Duke is your free play here. I'm on the fence. Virginia Tech, one thing that I will say, and we'll wrap this up, this is a TV game. So it is on ESPN. I think it's ESPN2 Thursday night. You get the cameras there, the home crowd.
It's no free money.
It's teams seem to play a little bit over their heads whenever the cameras are turned on. But one thing that you do got going for you for Duke, and this is one of my little pet angles, is Duke in their last game. They were a huge favorite against St. John's and only won, I think, by 6 points. So when you have a team that has that scare, I like to say it's the wake-up call.
Sure.
It gives the coach fuel to ride them, all week in practice.
Coach K doesn't ride his players, does he? I'll tell you what, and I watched that game, and I agree with what you're saying because it was a blowout for much of the game. But that athleticism and quickness, blowout relatively speaking, of St. John's was able to get themselves back into the game. And it was a 4-point game with about a minute or 2 to go. So I could see Coach K after the game laying into this team. Yeah. It's almost like they lost the game.
Right.
From his perspective.
To me, that's why I love that angle, because the team did win, but it gives the coach, he can ride them now. Because you can't ride a team after a 30-point blowout.
Exactly. Yep.
So, all right, there you have it. That's our first video. Scott says to take Duke, lay the points on Thursday night. We're going to be right back. We're going to take a look at a Friday night basketball game, NBA style. We're going to look at Miami and Philadelphia. We're going to find out if the Philadelphia 76ers are a contender or a pretender. We'll talk about that next.